Beneath the parking lot of this truck stop, there are 40,000 gallons of diesel sitting in underground tanks. Enough fuel to keep every truck here warm for a month. And tonight, not one drop of it can move. It's 4 in the morning on Interstate 35, somewhere between Fort Worth and the Oklahoma line. The thermometer reads 6 degrees Fahrenheit. The wind drags the feel of it down toward -15. The power grid failed hours ago, and when the grid died, the fuel pumps died with it. So the diesel sleeps underground, 100 feet from the trucks that need it, close enough to see, impossible to touch. And in the sleeper cab of every one of the 100+ 18-wheelers parked in this lot, a driver is awake in the dark. Doing the same cold arithmetic, fuel remaining, divided by heat per hour, equals how many hours of warmth are left. For some of them, the answer is comfortable. For others, the answer is a number small enough to keep them staring at the ceiling. None of this should be happening. Not here. This is Texas, a state built for heat waves, not Arctic air, and that is exactly what turned this week into one of the most dangerous stretches in modern trucking. An Arctic blizzard, in a place with no armor against it, trapping thousands of drivers who had never once needed to survive real cold, inside their cabs, for 3 straight days. This is how they did it. When a historic freeze shows up in the forecast, ordinary people respond in ordinary ways. They fill the fridge. They insulate the pipes. They lock the door and wait it out at home. That option doesn't exist for a truck driver. Freight has no snow days. The supermarket shelves everyone else is stripping bare get restocked by the exact same trucks now stuck on the exact same iced over interstates. A refrigerated trailer loaded with produce keeps demanding fuel whether the highway is open or not. So every winter, across the country, thousands of drivers run the same quiet equation. Push forward while the road still allows it, then park, and wait one person, inside one machine, with nothing standing between them and the storm, except equipment and judgment. In February of 2021, a mass of Arctic air slid down across the middle of the United States and reached much farther south than anyone expected. The event became known as Winter Storm Uri. Texas recorded temperatures it hadn't seen in more than 70 years. Ice shut down hundreds of miles of interstate highway. The state's power grid buckled under a load it was never engineered for. And rolling blackouts rippled through cities that had no playbook for them. Out on the highways, something unusual unfolded. Drivers who had built entire careers on southern routes, people who had never once needed to take cold seriously, suddenly found themselves parked at fuel stops and rest areas in conditions that northern drivers spend whole working lives training for. What went on inside those trucks across the following 3 days is the chapter the news never covered. The pictures that spread online were dramatic enough. Interstates glazed in ice, rigs jackknifed across overpasses, fuel stops dark and half buried. But pictures only show the outside. They can't show what it genuinely takes to keep a human being alive, tolerably warm, and legally rested inside a sleeper cab while everything around them, the fuel network, the power grid, the roads themselves, fails at the same time. Most people picture the obvious answer. The truck just idles. Engine on, heat on, driver watching movies until the thaw. And for a few drivers, in a few situations, that's roughly what happened. But idling through a 3-day storm carries a price that stacks up quietly. A loaded semi at idle drinks somewhere between 0.8 of a gallon and a full gallon of diesel every hour. Stretch that across 72 hours, and you've burned 60 to 70 gallons, a serious chunk of the truck's entire capacity, spent producing nothing but warmth. In a normal week, that's just expensive. During Uri, it was something much worse, impossible to replace. When the Texas grid went down, the fuel stations went down with it. The diesel was right there, resting in tanks under the ground. The trucks were right there, parked a stone's throw away. But with no electricity, no pump could move a single drop between the two. Drivers found themselves rationing warmth within sight of thousands of gallons they had no way to reach. This is the part outsiders never consider, because seeing it clearly requires something that only years behind the wheel can teach. Heat inside a parked truck during a genuine weather emergency was never a simple question of whether the engine runs. It's a systems question: fuel on board, access to more, the gear this particular truck happens to carry, and preparation that either happened hundreds of miles back or never happened at all. The drivers who came through those 3 days in the best shape were, no surprise, the ones whose trucks carried an auxiliary power unit, a compact, independent generator and climate system that runs on the same diesel as the main engine, while sipping only a fraction of it, usually between a tenth and half a gallon per hour. Across 3 days, that's the gap between burning 65 gallons and burning maybe 15. An Apu holds the sleeper at a livable temperature, keeps the batteries topped up, and powers the outlets, the small fridge, the phone, and for plenty of drivers, a medically essential breathing machine that has to run every single night. The industry has a name for all of it: hotel loads. Everything one person needs to live in a small space while the big engine stays silent. Trucks without an Apu typically lean on a diesel-fired bunk heater instead, a unit about the size of a shoebox that pulls fuel from the main tank and can run close to a full day on a single gallon. Astonishing efficiency. But a bunk heater makes heat and nothing else. No electricity, no charging, and during Uri, that gap ambushed the unprepared in a way nobody saw coming. A driver could stay perfectly warm and still watch the phone, the radar, the dispatcher, the one thread connecting them to the world, go black on the second morning. Beneath all of it ran a threat that sounds like a machinery problem rather than a human one. Yet it decided more outcomes that week than anything else on this list. Diesel contains paraffin wax. In normal weather, the wax stays dissolved, invisible, harmless. As the temperature slides into the 20s Fahrenheit, it begins to crystallize. The fuel goes cloudy, the first warning sign. Colder still, and the crystals thicken toward what engineers call the gel point. The moment diesel stops flowing, chokes the filters, and kills the engine outright. Fuel suppliers in the northern states blend winterized diesel for precisely this reason, and northern drivers dose their tanks with anti-gel additive as basic seasonal habit. But this storm flipped the map upside down. The drivers stranded across Texas had filled up in Texas with warm weather fuel that had never been treated, because until that week, it never needed to be. Some of the trucks that went silent during Uri never ran out of diesel at all. Their diesel simply stopped being a liquid. The storm doesn't check where you bought your fuel. Sleep, real sleep, not just endurance, turned out to be its own quiet battle. A sleeper cab in the middle of a major storm is not a restful place. Wind wraps around the curved body of a cab and produces a constant low-frequency pressure you feel as much as here. In a packed lot, a driver might be parked within 50 feet of several refrigerated trailers, each running its own diesel unit that cycles on and off all night, because frozen cargo doesn't acknowledge emergencies. Ice tapped against the glass for hours on end. Long-haul drivers develop, over years on the road, a style of sleeping most people never need to learn. Shorter cycles, broken pieces, banking rest whenever conditions allow it. Even here, federal hours of service rules still framed everything, but with the highway itself closed, the regulatory clock essentially froze. Nobody was driving. Everybody was simply parked. The only task left was to wait well. And waiting well, it turns out, looks almost boring. The experienced drivers built structure into the days. Weather checks on a schedule instead of every 5 anxious minutes. Real meals from the food they keep stocked in the cab as standing discipline. Because a person running on 18 hours without proper food won't be sharp enough to drive the moment the sand trucks finally roll through. In the calm stretches, some drivers walked the rows, knocking on doors, trading fuel readings, passing along which stops still had power an informal web of information, cab to cab, over CB channels, older than every satellite and app in the industry, and that week, more dependable than most of them. Under everything sat a financial truth that rarely makes it into these stories. Most drivers earn by the mile. Every hour spent parked along I-35 was an hour of zero income set against truck payments, insurance, and costs that never pause for weather. A driver sitting motionless for 3 days absorbs a loss that no per-mile rate was ever built to cover. That is the silent weight pressing on every parked truck in every storm. When the ice finally let go of the highways when the sun came back, and the state could breathe again, something revealing happened. The drivers who climbed down from those cabs were not shattered. They checked their tires. They brought their engines up slowly and gently. They cleared every mirror and every light, and they merged back into a supply chain now running days behind and needing them more urgently than ever. Going from stranded to rolling wasn't a recovery. It was a resumption, the thing professionals simply do, without ceremony. Because the road is open and the freight is still waiting. And that, more than the machinery or the fuel chemistry, is the part of trucking that never enters the conversation. The particular mental posture of someone who has trained themselves, across years and hundreds of thousands of miles, to absorb uncertainty without being unmade by it, to sit inside a small space while the world outside stops functioning, and stay fundamentally capable, to rest when rest is available, eat when food is available, and be ready the instant readiness is required. So the next time a winter storm empties your local store, and the news cuts to a dark line of trucks parked along a closed interstate, remember that none of those trucks are abandoned. Inside every single one is a person, quietly managing a situation most of us will never have to think about, until the trucks stop arriving. And if 3 days of ice and darkness test what a driver can handle from a parked cab, imagine the day the road doesn't freeze, it drowns. Water rising over the lanes faster than traffic can escape, on coastal highways with no high ground for miles. That's what hurricane season hands to truck drivers along the Gulf, and it forces a decision no blizzard ever asks, not how to wait it out, but when to walk away from the load.